Hey, everybody, welcome to the JRPG Pursuit, the podcast that is all about JRPGs, from collecting to playing to honestly, whatever you all would love it to be, because we're still new. We just started, right? This is what our fourth episode. We're just getting the plane off the ground here. So we're very open to your suggestions. What do you want to hear us talk about? If you're watching this on YouTube, you can leave us a comment below. If you are listening on Spotify or Apple Podcasts or anywhere else, audio only, shoot us an email, jrpgpursuit@gmail.com. We would love to hear your suggestions and thoughts about the show. But with all that aside, I would like to introduce myself. I'm one of your hosts, and my name is Branden.
And I'm Emily.
And I'm Abdallah.
And we are beyond thrilled to be here with you talking about just one of our all-time favorite topics, which is JRPGs and also ourselves. We love talking about ourselves. We don't. We're all pretty much the opposite of that. But we figure, now is a decent enough time to sort of pull back the curtain a little bit and let you all see the inner workings of what makes us the sorts of JRPG players that we are. And I thought it might be fun to start off before we kind of get into the main meat of it all, to kind of do a little show and tell, go over some things from our childhood that are meaningful to us, some pieces from our collection. I'll just go first because mine is pretty underwhelming. The only thing really that I have from when I was a kid is my copy of Chrono Trigger here, and it's great. I had loaned it to my at the time girlfriend, and her brother took it, and then we broke up. So the drama here, we broke up while it was still in her possession, and I didn't get it back for a long time. And when I finally did, she mailed it to me, and her brother had written all over it in Sharpie that this was saying it was his game. He'd written Luke's game, and he was an adult. He wasn't a child. I realized as I was saying it sounded like a little brother. This was her older brother. He was a grown man. But thanks to the magic of rubbing alcohol and Q-tips, I was able to get it off. You can't even really see it anymore. And it's a cherished piece of my collection. Also, I just wanted to show this because my wife made this for me. This is a little little Chrono doll.
Aww.
That she made for me, surprised me one Christmas. I love this thing. The detail is so cool.
Oh yeah, that's amazing.
It's like felting, I think, is this. So she takes wool and like stabs it with a needle, and anyway, Chrono Trigger is spoiler alert for the discussion ahead, is one of the big games for me that was very formative. So that's what I've got. Emily, what have you got?
Well, I have a few relics from my childhood that's surprisingly still here because my brother and we used to actually share a collection. And back in the day, if we wanted to play any new games or different games, we had to, sell off our games to GameStop. But I have a few things that still survived, including my original Game Boy Color here. So this is my first ever console, which we'll talk more about later. And so I got the Atomic Purple, which is my favorite still. And my first ever game, there's actually two games I think we got for Christmas, my brother and we had to kind of swap them whenever we're alternating games. The first one was Wario Land 2 for the Game Boy, which was my, I think, first ever platform. And then also the classic Pokemon Silver, which was one of my favorites, and definitely talk more about that further in our discussion.
Very nice. Very nice. Yeah, I completely missed the Game Boy Color. I had the original Game Boy and went straight on to actually missed the original Advance too. My next handheld was the SP. But I was always kind of jealous of those Game Boy Colors because in the 90s, that see-through plastic,
They're the best.
You
So
can't
pretty.
beat it. You can't beat it.
And I should have noted, actually, that this is not my original copy, because that was one of the things that I think, it was either a GameStop thing or when Amazon was actively looking for used things that you'd like ship to them and they would resell it for you. I think that may have wound up in that box back then. But
Yes, I did quite a bit of that too back in the day, and all regrets. All regrets.
I'll same.
Oh, So
some of it
Abdallah.
wasn't my decision, but still.
Oh, yeah. Well, when you
Some of
share
the
a collection, it's
it's hard. Yeah.
yeah. All right, Abdallah, what have you got?
Yeah, so I've got a few things from my childhood. One of them being like an old lunchbox, uh,
Oh,
and
yeah.
So
and
cool.
a thermos, Nintendo themed. So it's got all the Mario and Zelda in
See,
there.
this is
So
great for you folks listening on the audio version. The lunchbox is that classic one with Mario and Luigi watching The Legend of Zelda on
yeah,
television, and it's just beautiful. Like I
oh yeah,
either had that as a kid or was friends with somebody who did because I recognized it right away when he held it up.
yeah. This
Beautiful.
was I love this thing, and I don't know, survived a lot. So
It's in
uh,
good shape. Like that,
Yeah,
those
yeah,
yeah.
things tended to get beat up, and that looks immaculate.
exactly. It's covered in dust, so I probably should dust my world here. But outside of that, like I think we can get into it later on. But like one of the first games I got was Legend of Zelda, and
Mm.
I'll probably go into the details of like the story behind it. It's just a very simple story, but we can go into that later. And then also a little tidbit of a little. I don't know if anyone can see this. I'm gonna try to focus in on this, but it's a belt buckle Legend of Zelda. Because I was a cool kid in school as a child, wearing my Zelda belt. Uh,
Very
Yes.
cool.
yeah, so it's something that like somehow has survived that I've able to keep it that long without losing it as a kid, which is you know, pretty
That's
amazing. Because
astonishing because
yeah,
kids,
and how
I
small
couldn't
this
keep hold of
is,
anything.
like,
Hmm.
I mean, the
Yeah.
belt itself deteriorated, but this survived. So yeah, like some tidbits into the
Beyond wear and tear.
yeah.
Hmm.
It's great.
Got a bunch of
Well,
things, but we can always show them off as we go.
oh, for sure. Yeah, it warms my heart to see all these things.
Oh yeah.
Like just thinking about, the all the stuff I had as a kid and
Hmm.
how I wish that I could go back and tell the kid like this stuff is actually like you enjoy it now, but it's going to be super meaningful to you when you're older. So like do your future self a favor and don't sell it all to GameStop for pennies on the
Pennies.
dollar.
Yeah, I know.
It's atrocious.
Yeah.
But I mean when you're a kid too, it's like either you do that or you
Play
maybe get
games.
one or two games. Yeah, you maybe get one or two a
Yeah.
year
Yep.
and
That was
that's kind of
the
it.
case in my household. So
Yeah.
a little bit of Blockbuster here and there, but that was about it.
Yeah, renting
Yep.
games was big for me as well.
Hmm.
So I guess if it's okay with you guys, I'll just kick off the discussion with my history
Oh
with
yeah.
Japanese role playing games. Um, yeah, I started playing JRPGs when I was about 7 years old. So it was around 89, 90, somewhere around there.
Hmm.
And like magic, a copy of Dragon Warrior showed up at my house. And like when you're a kid, pretty much always a game showing up is like magic because you don't know necessarily what your parents went through to get it
Hmm.
or what. But this was one that they didn't even get for me. It just literally showed up at my house. I think because we subscribed to Nintendo Power, and they made 5 million copies of this game, and we're like, what do we do with these? And they sent them to people. So I got that in the mail, and it was like, I don't know. I didn't understand it really as a 7-year old, but it was fascinating enough that like I couldn't stop playing it. Like, previously to this, the games that I played were all 2D platformers, a little bit of Zelda. I mean, I did play Zelda. But for the most part, 2D platformers. So, you're running through worlds as Mario, and that's cool and everything. But this game had like castles, and then you would leave the castle and you would go into a city, and there's all these people you can talk to. And then you go out into the field and you are walking through a forest and then in mountains, and then you go in a cave. And it was just like, what? Like, there's so much stuff here, right? And I think even though I never got farther in that game, then there's a part early on where you rescue the princess. Sorry for the spoilers, everybody. Saving the princess is not the end of the game in this one. You save the princess, and then you have to continue the quest. I think that's as far as I ever got as a kid. And I didn't actually finish it until I was well into my 30s. I went back and replayed it. But it's just like really laid the foundation for me. And then from there, it was, I wanted more experiences like that. Like I wanted to have that sort of game. I wanted to have a new one in my rotation at all times. So like I would get $1 a week for allowance. I don't think I really did any chores. It was just my parents bribing me to behave or something. But
grades.
I would take, get decent grades. And so I took my $1 a week and saved it because the movie rental place down the road was $2 for a game for a night. So every 2 weeks, like clockwork, I would totter down the road with my $2 and get another game. And so I remember renting, like, I'm pretty sure I rented like Breath of Fire 2 from there, and Tecmo Secret of the Stars, which if you are familiar with the Super Nintendo retro scene, you might recognize it as the biggest joke that anyone ever played on JRPG fans. Terrible game. So yeah, I mean, it kind of all culminated for me with Chrono Trigger in that era, like I showed earlier. It's just was the game that hit at just the right time for me and felt like just the perfection of that formula that had gone on before it. So that's, I mean, I don't want to like talk all day, but like that's kind of the quick and dirty summary of where I started, at least.
For JRPGs. Did you have games before that? I'm assuming you had games before because you were subscribed to Nintendo Power.
Yeah, I was the Mario kid. One of my earliest memories, like literally one of my earliest memories, is seeing my cousin playing Super Mario Brothers at his house. And he was like a year older than me, so he would have been 4. I think I was 3. So that's one of my
That's very young. Yeah.
So one of my first memories, conscious Branden, was that. So it's not super surprising that it like became an important part of my life, I guess.
That's awesome.
So Dala, what was your first ever RPG?
Ooh, first ever. It goes back to the NES. I mean, granted, kind of in the same vein as Branden. I never quite finished those games as a kid because, like, I was what, like 6 or so years old, 6 or so getting those games, and so like, I initially played when I was younger. I had like some cousins that were down in Tennessee that would go visit regularly, and they had like Atari and Nintendo system at first, and so they were big on RPGs, and so I initially with them played Final Fantasy and Dragon Warrior and things like that, but I never actually quite finished them. But I ended up getting them for myself, but also not finishing them at home because as a 6-year-old you just don't have the it's just, it kind of goes over your head with a lot of the expectations that they have on you in those games to figure it out.
A lot of those games too, right? They required like strategy guides, right, to complete. So I can imagine a 6-year-old, taking the time to go through those and read everything.
Yeah, they're not easy for adults. Like
no.
Full-grown people struggle with them. So yeah, it's not surprising.
Exactly. And so when it came to like RPGs, the first one that I really like dove into and finished was probably Final Fantasy 2 on the Super Nintendo. American Final Fantasy 2. But that was the first one that really, I played it from beginning to end, completely as an JRPG. And that's what kind of got me into just like playing everything at that point. I was looking for what else can I find? What else can I play on here? So it's a pretty good, in my earlier years, it was less like JRPG heavy in terms of being the 6-7 years old. It's all like very platform heavy. It's very Nintendo-esque games of the time period. But as Super Nintendo started to come in, that's when you really started to dive into it. And then you hit your stride around the PlayStation era, I think. of being old enough to really grasp all the different nuances in the JRPGs that you probably didn't understand as a kid. But like as a kid, like Super Mario RPG was great. Like I love playing that. It was the perfect. And then Chrono Trigger, I had a lot of friends. Initially, I didn't own that, but my buddy did. And then I played the heck out of that, and then I had to get it. Um, so it's definitely like a lot of really good memories of Super Nintendo, I think, is truly when I really got into RPGs. Um, and yeah, I don't want to go too far into it, but I think that's a good place to end this scene.
I guess I introduced my first ever RPG, which was Pokemon Silver. Before then, I was, I guess, a PC gamer. My dad was pretty, I guess, technologically savvy for the time. And so I was always gaming on some sort of PC and using those um, clearance sale, what are they called? Drugstore CD-ROM games they always had on the shelves. The ones that were targeted towards kids. So a lot of point and click adventure games like Fred the Fish and Putt Putt. So it wasn't until this Pokemon Silver that I experienced an RPG for the first time because I think there weren't that many, at least on the systems I was playing,
Hmm.
that were really targeted towards children playing, RPG style games. But yeah, I played the heck out of this. I think this is still probably the game that I played or replayed the most
Yeah.
since at the time with my brother and I sharing games, we didn't really have a lot of variety. So you'd have to kind of replay the games that you already owned if
Mhm.
you wanted to play stuff. But what was, I think, really amazing about Pokemon Silver in particular was not only like kind of the sense of grinding and you have the night and day sort of thing, which as a kid I thought was really cool. Um, and after you beat the Elite Four at the end, it opens up to a whole other kind of map, right? From
Hmm.
the original games that were
Johto,
from Red and Blue,
the Johto.
that region, Johto. And I didn't play, those before. I just kind of knew about them because Pokemon was everywhere. I knew about the trading card game and the anime or
Mhm.
cartoon series. And so I was just super amazed, like, oh, there's more to this game when you go on this cruise ship, and it opens up further. So yeah, I've sunk in so many hours into that game. It's not even funny. And then I went on eventually to get Pokemon Yellow, actually.
Oh yeah.
Again, this is not my original copy. I had to rebuy this.
Mhm.
But just to experience Johto for the first time. And I loved it. And having Pikachu follow you around was
Oh yeah.
adorable. And just building up your team. And I had to make sure I had different elements so that I had a well-rounded team.
Hmm.
And I always try to go for ones that had multiple transformation or evolutions so that they're stronger. So I was very much like a min-max kid back then. So I think this kind of speaks to some of my inclination towards math and statistics. So if if you, for anyone listening, if you have children, definitely give them Pokemon or something to get their brains working. If you
That's a
want them to be a bit more
potentially,
math savvy.
yeah, that's a potentially untapped selling point for JRPGs in general.
Yes.
Like
It's
for
true.
me, being not a math person, I'm like, what can I do to minimize the amount of thinking I need to do about these stats? Like, give me the simple, like the number turns blue and goes higher. That's all right. That's good.
Nope.
That means it works.
Yeah.
So Emily, what
Mhm.
when you were prior to your Game Boy, or maybe even after you had the Game Boy, did you ever play any role playing games on PC? I mean, obviously not like JRPGs, but like anything role playing adjacent.
Prior to that, so okay, we're talking. I think I got my Game Boy Color when it came out, like in 1998, and so I
Hmm.
was like 8, 9 at the time whenever I got
Hmm.
this eventually. Um, And so I'm trying to think back because there are a lot of Flash games I used to play like on cartoonnetwork.com and those type of websites. And there may have been some like RPG elements in some of those, but nothing that is like a traditional RPG with like turn-based elements like Pokemon.
Yeah,
Mm.
I'm trying to think myself because I was primarily console, but we did have a decent computer growing up, and actually that
Mhm.
was how I played Final Fantasy VII for the first time, as I got it on
Yeah.
PC because I didn't have a PlayStation yet. And I can't imagine that was my first role playing game on the PC. There must have been more, but I can't.
I know there are other like more the Western style RPGs that were,
Mhm.
popular back then, but
Hmm.
those were targeted, towards adults. I don't think a kid would have tried those
Right.
unless they had like a parent who or an older sibling who had those, which was
Hmm.
not the case for me because my dad didn't like RPGs at all. I think he may have played, I think Myst was like the closest he ever went to one,
Yeah.
I was the big
but
Mist kid. Abdallah, we were talking about this recently, I
Yeah.
think.
Yeah,
Like
we
I
were.
had all the novels, the Mist
uh-huh.
novels, and
Yeah.
everything Mist related. I was super obsessed with that.
That's
Um,
cool.
yeah, it's brilliant. And they just remade Riven, the sequel, just came out
Yeah.
this last month, I think,
Oh,
on
I didn't know that.
Steam. Yeah, so I've started playing that a
Oh,
little
cool.
bit, and that's very nostalgic for me to be back in that world. Um, yeah, I so the issue with a lot of the PC role playing games, I think they were all kind of on the nose in their naming, like wizardry. And since
Mm,
came from a
Yeah.
very
yeah.
religious household, and if
Ah,
my dad had seen that a
Oh.
game was called wizardry, he'd be like, "That sounds like witchcraft.
magic or
You can't
something.
play
Yeah.
that." Yeah. Whereas
Mm.
like games like Final Fantasy, Dragon Warrior kind of slipped under the radar, you know?
I'm
Yeah.
So I was able
surprised.
to, yeah, I was able to get away with those. Um, but
I guess
yes.
because you have things like the Lion Witch in the Wardrobe, it has fantasy elements, but still, I think that's probably okay,
Oh.
in those households.
Oh yeah, yeah.
So,
We watched our fair share of the BBC versions of the Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe
mhm.
movies.
I
There you
that oh
go.
my Brandon, like you just like untapped some memories. I used to watch that like yearly with my mom. We haven't watched it in a while, but we would rent it from the library. Uh, off very often
Me.
that BBC version of Lion.
Me
I never
nicely.
saw that one.
If you ask me politely, I'll do my impression of Lucy from the Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe BBC.
I need you
I'll
to
do it
say,
anyway. You don't even have to ask me.
Yeah,
She says,
go ahead.
"Hey, Mr. Tumnus, Mr. Tumnus, Mr. Tum," because she just had those really prominent front teeth. She hadn't grown into them
Oh,
yet. Mr. Tumnus.
oh,
It
uh,
was just the greatest. We
I was
just,
hoping I was
oh,
hoping you'd
that's
say Mr.
hilarious.
Tumnus. Um, that's so funny.
how come they
Uh,
never made a role playing game out of the Chronicles of Narnia? You think that
uh,
would be a?
There's the
Think that'd be
first
a shoe in?
Caspian IP movie, but I don't think that, or video game, but I don't think that's an RPG.
did they
Oh,
make?
based on the.
Oh yeah, they
Oh,
did make
the
the
more recent
movie.
ones, the
Yeah, they
Mhm.
made
movie.
like a movie tie-in games.
Yeah.
Oh
Well,
I
some
yeah.
of those were
remember.
popular. Some of those were decent back then, but
Hmm. Well,
Yeah,
even going as far back as like the original Nintendo movie IPs weren't necessarily an indicator that it was terrible.
um, yeah, it was like literally a grab bag of what you were gonna get. Like you can either
Hmm.
get like you get Fester's Quest from Adam's Family, which is notoriously a great game. No,
Notoriously beloved and
it's
considered a masterpiece.
yeah, as told by angry video game nerds. Also,
Yes.
um, but yeah, it was really kind of you never knew what you were gonna get with those tie-in games, and it's because it was an easy sell.
yeah.
Like parents would see that and say like you get like Goonies 2. We were like, wait, what happened to Goonies 1 though?
I know the sequel.
The sequel.
I looked around for the movie as a kid because I loved the movie.
Oh
I saw
yeah,
there was a video game called Goonies too, and I was like, they made another one? No, they didn't. They did
no.
not.
No. The Goonies
Um,
is great though. The
yeah.
movie.
Oh,
Oh,
fantastic.
it's one of my
So good.
favorite movies.
Fantastic.
I watch that often, but PC
Yeah.
World is what interesting place. Like I grew up as well heavily on the PC, just
Mhm.
because my dad worked like he's always been in the computer space. Like he's always been in computer engineering and stuff like that. So we always had like multiple like computers at home. So we would do like LAN, like Half-Life,
Oh, nice.
play Half-Life in LAN
Ah.
amongst like the family. So like my brother and I and my
That's fun.
dad would play like LAN or Counter-Strike back in the day. But at the same time, I really enjoyed playing like Diablo. Like those are kind of
Hmm.
like
Yeah.
those, or like point and click games as well. Like I played a
Hmm.
lot of the Sierra point and click games, so a lot of King's Quest as a kid.
Mm.
Yeah.
Played a lot of like what's it called? What's the pirate one? I can't think of the name for it now.
Secret of Monkey Island.
Yeah, Secret of Monkey Island. I don't
Yeah.
know why I split that up, but Anyways, those games were amazing. Like Sam and Max, all those like really interesting
Mhm.
like point and click games that were like
Yeah.
really popular at the time, was really big on my radar, as well as playing like Doom.
Sure.
Um,
I actually feel like there's a pretty straight line, and maybe this is the same for you, between those sorts of games on PC and my affection for JRPGs, because I was most interested, especially after the NES era, when stories became more important to
yeah.
JRPGs. Like Final Fantasy II
Hmm.
was the first like game story that I was like, holy cow! Like this is a real, this is
Yeah.
a movie. Like this is, it just felt so cool to experience a story like that. That's primarily what I was chasing,
Mm,
that feeling of experiencing a really good story in a game
Yeah.
that I had some measure of control over, right?
yeah.
So, I got it from JRPGs, certainly. That there was an abundance of it in that. But on PC, I got it from games like the Sierra games, King's Quest and Space Quest, and
Yeah.
um, you know, even Myst, like the storytelling in those games, those sorts of adventure games was a little more, um, what's the word, like non-traditional,
Yeah.
uh, but it's still like triggered this a similar sort of thing in my imagination where I just wanted to get lost in those stories, right? And
Yeah.
so like to me, and JRPGs I still feel like are the best conveyor of that feeling, at least for
Hmm.
myself. But it definitely exists in other games. And like all these games I have on my shelves around me, 90% of them, 95% of them are JRPGs, but there are some in here that aren't, because, they do that similar sort of thing for me. They tickle that story bone. I don't know. You know what I'm saying?
No, like that's
Totally.
like
Yeah. Yeah. I think I was similar. I didn't play a lot of those Sierra titles that you just mentioned. They're, of course, classics. I've heard of them. But um, for me, I was also a really prominent reader when I was younger in a lot of fantasy
yeah.
novels. And so I think I got my fix for storytelling through that medium
Mhm.
mostly. But um, I, of course, also really loved JRPGs. And it wasn't really until the PS2 I recognized what a JRPG was and was kind of seeking out those titles specifically because of a lot of times the character driven narratives that they offered.
Hmm.
So for me, I'm going to move on to my next era of gaming. Oh, I was still young. When did the PS2 come out? Was that 2002?
2000.
Yeah, it was about 2000,
2000?
2000. Yeah.
Yeah, I think I was at least 12 when that came out, and I had one. And so Kingdom Hearts was a huge JRPG for me when it came to
Yeah.
characters and storytelling. Even though I know this gets some kind of like I don't know, I don't say flack in the JRPG community, but there's definitely I think a camp if you're kind of pro Kingdom Hearts and pro not Kingdom Hearts. But I'm
I
definitely
feel
pro
like
Yeah.
Kingdom Hearts.
I feel like
'Cause I grew up with it.
most of the flack that it gets is more just like teasing directed at Tetsuya Nomura for not being
Yeah.
able to tell a straightforward story and needing to make it super
There's
convoluted.
that. But I think
Yeah.
Um,
also when this first came out, people were like Disney JRPGs? What?
sure. I mean, it's
Sure.
crazy, right? It's like a
It is.
crazy
It is.
idea,
Yeah.
but it
Yeah.
it like it was in the right hands and it worked.
It really
So,
worked. I was not a Disney kid when I was a child. Like I watched
mhm,
Disney movies. I liked them, but I wasn't like
mhm.
obsessed with Disney at all. But that made me appreciate a lot of Disney characters more than, their original kind of movies and whatnot.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, it ended up being a super smart partnership. And
Really? Yeah.
Hmm.
and it makes like I had just graduated high school when that came out, and that was one of the first games I remember playing when I was living on my own for the first time, because I was just 18, and I had moved out. And like that was, yeah, like Kingdom Hearts, and I think Xenosaga Episode 1 is another one
Mhm.
I really prominently remember playing during that time.
I wish I knew about that
And
game back then.
yeah, I mean,
Oh,
like, whew, man, Xenosaga, whew, dang,
we'll get into that.
yeah. Um, but yeah, that's kind of your second era. Then is you started with Game Boy,
Yes. Game Boy
and you
Color, Game Boy Advance, and
okay,
then PS2.
into the PS2. So that was that your first?
And then PC was kind of all throughout there. And
Yeah.
Abdallah was talking about playing with his family. I did the same thing with my brother and my dad. We used to play all these first-person shooter games online
Yeah.
together. The one that we mostly played was Wolfenstein, or the Return to Castle Wolfenstein, that one.
Yep.
And some enemy territory too. But yeah, that was, I guess what we didn't really talk about when it comes to how PC influenced our love for JRPGs. I was also dabbling into a lot of MMOs at the time.
Oh.
Yeah.
And so that I think really helped. I think, seeking out a lot of storytelling and kind of gameplay that I wasn't really getting from the PS2, because I didn't really, I think, know of a lot of PS2 JRPGs at the time. I just knew the ones that they kind of marketed towards me and that my brother knew at the time. But something about like RuneScape and even World of Warcraft, I just kind of sunk into that so much because of the character building and the atmospheric kind of world building and lore and all that. So that's also really why I liked Final Fantasy 12.
Oh, yes.
This was my first Final Fantasy game I ever played, and I just loved the mechanics. I think also getting into kind of the math function stuff, their gambit system. I really, that tickled me so much. I loved it. I need to play the Zodiac Age version to see how they revamp that. But at the time, I loved that mechanic and how they handled the battle system, where I didn't have to be social. I didn't have to build like a guild and have other people play with me so I could experience these type of stories and gameplay.
Sure.
It's all in a nice compact single player game. And the supporting cast I really liked in this game as well. Balthier and Fran were amazing. I love them. But yeah, that was kind of, I guess, most of my history when it came to JRPGs back in my kind of middle school, early high school days.
The kind of second JRPG generation, like for me, I was there with the Super Nintendo at the time, and I talked a bit about those with like Chrono Trigger and Final Fantasy 2 and 3 or 4 and 6, so people don't get mad at me. I once in a video I referred to it as Final Fantasy 2, and very explicitly talking about the original Super Nintendo release of the game, which is that's what it was called. And somebody got so like not just an angry comment or just so mad. Somebody got so mad. Like I've never had a commenter, I don't think, as angry as that person was that I called it Final Fantasy 2. So I want to.
There's the latest commenter sometimes.
Sometimes
really into that.
Sometimes it's very important. So I just want to be clear that I do know that it was Final Fantasy 4 and Final Fantasy 6. I'm aware, and so those were great. Very also formative for me. But the original PlayStation is for me kind of where my tastes really started to develop, and I can say with a great deal of conviction that it's Xenogears, the Xeno series, but Xenogears in particular, that kind of crafted me. Like I for a long time, I've kind of been working on a video in the background, in between other things, of like a retrospective on Xenogears, because it's one of the few games I can legitimately say changed my life. Like I'm a different person today than I was back then, and not just from naturally growing up, but like because I played this game, it did some really kind of significant things in my life. And I don't know if you can see it, probably not on the video, but back here you can kind of see it on the wall. Yeah, I've got the Veltal, of course. Yeah, my little figure. But behind it is a magazine ad, framed on the wall, and I'll try to put it up here on the screen so you can see what I'm talking about, for those of you who are watching on YouTube. But it was a magazine ad for Xenogears, and it talked about, for one thing, it said it was from the people who made Chrono Trigger. So it was like a lot of the original team that worked on Chrono Trigger, this was their next game. So that immediately had my attention. But just that particular magazine ad was so evocative to me that I was like, I need to get a PlayStation. Like I was okay getting Final Fantasy 7 on PC and just not having a PlayStation. But when I saw that ad, I was like, I need this. I need to get a PlayStation. And so that the fact that I have that ad framed is because I told my wife that story one time, and she just like went on the hunt and found it for me on eBay. Somebody was selling a magazine ad on eBay. And so yeah, she got it for me for Christmas one year, and I was blown away because I didn't think that was a thing you could do, buy magazine ads on eBay, but apparently.
Hey,
Um,
Yeah.
yeah, so Xenogears kind of changed the way I think legitimately. So it was really important. It was really significant to me, and it kind of taught me about the sort of stories that I was most interested in. Sort of dark, convoluted, interesting stories with compelling characters, lightheartedness strewn throughout as well. Like I'm not all the angsty emo kid. That was never really me. But Takahashi's style, and to a large extent, his wife Soraya Saga is her pen name.
yep.
Their storytelling is just very me. So that's kind of like the next big step in my evolution was playing Xenogears. What about
Well,
you,
I'm looking
Abdallah?
forward to that video.
Yeah, one of these
Me
days.
too.
One of these
'Cause
days it'll come out.
recently I've seen a lot of YouTubers saying how they didn't really enjoy Xenogears when they got to it.
Oh, I mean, if you were to play it for the first time today, I have
Yeah.
a strong feeling that it would be very difficult to overcome.
I've started it and I've been enjoying it. I just put it down. And I do hear it's one of those games that does kind of decline in quality, but I think that has, part of that's because of the production, like how it
Yeah,
was made
Yeah.
back then.
yeah,
There
the
was
infamous running out of money and cramming the entire final third of the game into a series of barely connected cutscenes. Yeah, there were issues with it, and I would love, like everybody, I would love a HD 2D remake or something, to
Yeah.
finish it properly.
Yeah. I think Branden, you took the thunder on the Xenogears part because I mean, right there with
That's what I'm here for.
that's exactly it. If we go into like like you said, like for me, PS1 was when I really started to hit my stride with RPGs. I mean, I liked them in the SNES era, and I played like through like Lufia and other ones like that. But when PlayStation hit, is like kind of like the same vein as you. Is like that's when I started to realize what I like and what I don't like in terms of games that I like, what I'm looking for. And so like I played through a lot of the different RPGs on the PlayStation 1, be it if I owned it or my friends owned it. And playing through 7 and 8, and then one of initially when I got introduced to Xenogears, my friend had it, and I went over to his place and we started playing it, and we ended up playing it all night long. And I just like, and I told him like I'm just gonna keep playing this, and then I saved up money and I went and bought it, and I was just like, and I played it like consecutively every year. I'd replay it, and it was like that. It was really like a formative, like as well for me, a really big aspect of where my tastes like kind of came from that era. Is that like I've never played a game, or I've never experienced a game that had such a deep storyline that really had you think and understand what is happening across the different eras of these characters, and how like it could really make you kind of question a lot of things around you, or even just like realize it's something that's like complex as like reading a novel. Maybe like growing up reading, I did a lot of reading as well, like Emily was bringing up. Is like I really enjoyed the story aspect, and it's like Xenogears really kind of took it from like a your basic save the world stories to being something a little bit more than just that. And so it was really that game that kind of set the stage for me, leading into, let's say, like if we go into the PS2 era, that was the first time in my life where I can remember actually pre-ordering games preemptively, going into this. Like before that, I would just kind of buy games as I saw, as I experienced. And I wasn't like, I mean, outside of Final Fantasy 7 and 8, like the major games that you'd kind of like coming out of the Super Nintendo, you'd already
the known
like,
entities.
yeah. But like, we were talking about Xenosaga. Like that was one of the first games I pre-ordered, and I got the pre-order specials with them. So I got like the little poster of Shion,
Oh,
with her.
nice.
Yeah, so like I have that
Very
on one
cool.
of my like it's
You
a
still
little
have that. Oh, very
I
cool.
I still have it. It's a little dinged up,
Sure.
but it still exists. But and then I still have like my strategy guide for when I bought that. And then
Hmm.
with Emily, the same thing with Kingdom Hearts. It's like I remember when they first announced that. It was like when I started to actually pay attention to like announcements a lot more.
Mm.
It was like that era. Like I think PS2 era was like when I was really in the know, or I was
There was more
actively looking
technology
things
back
up.
then too, right? Like with the
Exactly.
computers and like I watched G4 TV too back then. I
Yeah,
Yeah.
don't know some of those titles at least that were mentioned.
Hmm.
exactly. So
Just
like
more of an internet presence for in demand for things like video game news was
Yeah.
new, and that was exciting to follow those sites and stuff. Yeah.
exactly. So like when they announced Kingdom Hearts, I was like, okay, like I like Disney, I like Final Fantasy, Square. I can get behind this. This should be
Hmm.
a fun time. And so I think like PS2 era is a fun era. I think there's a lot of like experimentation with games,
Oh yeah.
um, as well as just a lot of like assortments of RPG styles that you
Hmm.
really kind of got to experience in that era of things. So there's like a nostalgia to the PS2 that you kind of feel like it's like slightly different than the PS. Like it's definitely different from the PS1 era. PS1 era is like a very systematic. You know exactly what the best games are, but like there's a lot of like little interesting games on the PS2 that not a lot of people have played or um
Well, the library was much bigger, right?
that's true. They have a
It was
So
huge. Yeah.
it's
Well,
humongous.
it's so interesting, the PS2 era, because there was a lot of experimentation, like you said, Dalla. There was a ton of experimentation going on, and also it was like an era where, strangely, so many JRPG series went to die. Like
that's true.
so many
Oh
JRPG
yeah.
series,
Oh, that's
whether they
sad.
started prior to the PlayStation 2 or started with the PlayStation 2, had multiple entries and then ended, and then we haven't seen them since. Like
I think part of
it's
that is because of the PS3 era and the
yes,
mindset around JRPGs.
the
Yes.
PS3 era, the kind of downplaying of the genre as a thing,
Yeah.
and just the fact that I think Japanese developers struggled more with moving into the HD era.
Hmm.
There's
Um,
that.
so
But
I mean, it
also, I
was
think there was anti like anime stuff too.
yeah. Well,
Yeah.
certainly there was a stigma around that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's interesting hearing about, like, especially like Emily, coming from your perspective, starting with a bit later along in the history of
Hmm.
games. Like,
Hmm.
it got me thinking a little bit about how, you know, the kind of the way I look at games, or like the development of games, the history of games, is like, and this isn't a revolutionary thought. I'm not the first person to think something like this, but like, it's kind of like being in a boat on a river, or like on a raft, say, on going down a river.
Mm.
And as you go forward, things get better and better. Like we're seeing more exciting things, and all of the stuff that happened before, like, you can still go back and experience it, but it takes some effort to really
Some
experience
struggle.
it, because you're kind of going against the current.
Hmm.
So like with something like Xenogears, I know a lot of people, like you were saying, kind of weren't enjoying it as much. Newer you like JRPG players that are going back and trying to
Yeah.
play it. There's a big hurdle to overcome to be able to experience it. I'm not trying to dissuade anybody who's newer to the genre from going back and trying old games.
Right.
All I'm saying is, like, expect there to be
Struggle.
hurdles that are because everything, the development of the genre has been this forward progression.
Hmm.
If you're going to go back, there's going to be some things that you're going to have to kind of grin and bear.
Yeah.
Yeah. When was playing the original Final Fantasy VII, beginning of last year, really, and
Mhm.
I think I finished it. Let's see, a couple months into this year, and there was just I think what was really nice was they did add a lot of quality of life features that made it so that I could get through the game, because if without those, I don't know if I would have finished the game. Like
Right.
Yeah.
I enjoyed my experience, but it was just so tedious, and there's so many things that you don't see in modern RPGs nowadays that
Mhm.
you kind of wonder like, why am I struggling through this? And making my way through this when there are other games in my backlog that are a bit more modern that I might be like, frankly, just enjoy a little bit more the experience playing them.
Right.
So
It was a different world, especially if you were a kid playing like Final
yes,
Fantasy VII when it first came out.
yes,
Yeah.
Chances are you didn't have a backlog. That wasn't a
no,
concept that existed for us.
no,
You had
we
that
we had
game.
limited games,
Yeah,
right? We
Exactly.
just had to play our game that we had.
So it wasn't tedious at the time. It was like, well, it
No,
was. I mean, I wasn't a fan of grinding even as a kid, but like it was all we had to do. So,
yeah,
you
yeah,
know, but like you're right. Trying to go back and play games like that today is super hard even for someone who grew up with them because of that, because the genre has progressed so much
yes,
that, you know, we expect certain things. So I think it's great when Square Enix or anybody goes back to an older game, puts in quality of life
yeah.
features that
Hmm.
that take some of the edge
Makes
off
it
of
easier.
that.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I know I got
Yeah.
a lot of flack when I said I was using all the quality of life features and kind of not
Yeah.
really working with, the materia kind of system
Hmm.
as it was intended. But frankly, I'm just happy I did that to get through it
Yeah.
and enjoy the
You
story
Yeah.
for what it was.
play games the way you want to play games, everybody.
Exactly.
There's not a
Yes.
wrong way to play the game. Any game.
As long
There's
No.
as
no
long as
wrong
you're
way to play
happy,
it.
like
As
as
long as
long.
you are
Also, the developers put those features in. It's not like you're not supposed to like touch
right.
them,
You didn't break the game. You're not breaking the end user license agreement by
Yeah.
using the fast forward option or the auto grind thing. Like it's
Yeah.
Yeah.
fine. Everybody chill out. It's
Yeah.
okay. Play games
Yeah.
Yeah,
how
and if
you
you
want
want
to
to
play
just
games.
do like I think I did half the game, without any of those enabled, and then that latter half I just enabled them. Like I felt
Hmm.
pretty satisfied doing that.
Yep.
Yeah. I mean,
And your experience with the game is no worse than anybody else's
Yep,
experience. Like you
I
had
agree.
your own unique experience with the game, and hopefully you enjoyed yourself overall. And and if
I'm
you
glad I
didn't,
did
hopefully.
because now we have the new Final Fantasies. I feel like I
Mhm.
have that foundation that I could enjoy those even more. So
Correct. I
exactly.
agree with that. Yeah, 100%.
Yeah. Yeah. It's just, it's hard to go back for someone who hasn't really experienced those eras. Like, I mean, if you look back at like a game like, let's say, for instance, like Lunar,
Mm.
it's a very much a product of its time. Like for me, I love that game. It's very nostalgic. Um, it is a great game in the sense of like, it's fun, but it doesn't have a lot of those quality of life improvements that a lot of people see. The story is a bit like, it's working design, so it's a product, especially it's a product of the time period.
yes,
A
yes,
lot of like very
Like
90s
Bill
culture.
Clinton jokes in there. Like,
Yeah. Like it's very like pop culturally like specific to the 90s
yeah.
hmm
and such. So like it's hard to kind of go back as like I say if you're a new RPG player, going back and playing one of those games, and you get a lot of people on the internet that are like the white knights that will describe, hey, this is my favorite game of all time, I love Lunar and everyone should love it too.
Hmm.
But at the same time, you come from an era that you grew up with that. It's hard to go
Right.
back and play those kind of games if you
yeah,
did not grow up in that culture of that game
for sure.
at the time.
Like the
Yeah.
PS2 had a janky, system, especially the 3D
Oh
models and
yeah.
moving around and all that. But
Hmm.
I still have a fondness for that. But I
Oh yeah.
know, people who didn't grow up in that era, they're not going to see that in the same light.
It's just you're seeing it through your own lens. And Dal, I'm glad you brought up Lunar because that's a kind of an example in and of itself of what we're talking about with
Yeah.
like how the games that formed us, like they're not going to necessarily appeal to everybody the same way. Because when I got Lunar Silver Star Story complete on the PlayStation, I fell in love with it. It was just amazing. The characters talked. There was
Yes.
voice acting in it occasionally, and
Yeah.
I didn't know it was bad because I was a kid and I was excited. Ashley Angel, actually, I don't know if you recognize the name Ashley Angel. He played the main character Alex in that game. He
Yeah.
went on to be in the boy band O Town, featured in the Making the Band
Oh,
show in
O
the
Town.
2000s. Yeah,
I think they also
that's a
were featured
throwback.
on, weren't they on Smart House, the Disney Channel movie?
they may have been
I
actually.
think so. Yeah.
Yeah. So that's just a little.
I remember all
just-
those Disney Channel babies back then.
So the next time you
Weird.
are playing video game trivia, and now you know Ashley Angel, you know a little bit about him. Anyway, point is, like, I loved that game. And I went back and replayed Lunar
Oh yeah.
a year and a half ago, and I
Mhm.
loved it. I had a great time with it.
Oh yeah.
I also then went and tried to play Lunar the Silver Star, the Sega CD,
Ooh. Yeah.
just the previous iteration of that same game. And I couldn't do it. I couldn't get past the first dungeon. I was like, this is so old school. And Lunar on the PlayStation is very old school.
Yeah.
But I was like, this is so old school. I could not do it. So it doesn't even take that much time for a game to feel that way if you didn't experience it
Yeah.
in its moment. Like if you
Mhm.
or in your moment, like if a kid is born today and the first thing you do is introduce him to the Nintendo, like, you know, the original NES, the kid's going to have fun and play the game and not
Oh
going to
yeah.
know that there's better things out there. But you know what I mean? Like
Yeah.
whatever you
I
experience as a kid.
I do think there are certain game designs that do age better than others. Like for
Yeah.
example,
Oh
A
yeah.
Link to the Past, I think has aged really well.
That's part of the
For
brilliance, the
one of
part of the
those.
genius of that game
Mhm.
is it was so ahead of its time that you could make a game exactly like that today, and people have, and
Yeah,
it's
Yeah.
great. It's still good,
yeah.
you know.
My first
Yep.
experience for that was on the GBA, so I didn't even play the original, and I loved it. It was my favorite game as a kid.
Oh
Mhm.
So
yeah.
I think that
That is
speaks
a
volumes.
classic. And like
And from what I remember, the game that kind of got you back into gaming in adulthood was A Link Between Worlds, right? Like,
Yes, yes. During grad school, when I wanted to
oh,
start gaming again after
mhm,
I love that
doing
game.
all the school grind.
mhm.
But yeah, that was a great game.
And
That
that's, you know, that's not that fundamentally different gameplay wise from
no.
No,
Link
you
to
just
the
blended the
Past.
walls. That's the only kind of new thing that
Yeah.
Mhm.
they featured in there.
Yeah.
Um
But
and Brandon, you brought up like, Chrono Trigger being one of your favorite games, and I mean most
I,
JRPG
I think that's
fans
aged
love.
really well too.
Yeah, that's like one of the RPGs that you can say from that era that like really aged well. I mean, outside of like Final Fantasy VI, I think as well. Um,
Sure.
did a great job of aging. But it's
Mhm.
just like the mechanics behind it were very like it's to this day you see it being utilized in indie RPGs or things like that
Right.
that are trying to like emulate that kind of like nostalgia
Yeah,
for it.
similar
So
to A Link to the Past, Chrono Trigger was like kind of the amalgamation of all of the lessons learned from RPGs up to that point,
yeah,
you know?
yep, exactly.
It kind of makes you wonder what game from like the current generation is going to be remembered fondly, in
Hmm.
10, 20 years from now. Kind of that
Yeah,
same sentiment.
Yeah, that's an interesting question. Like, what game has the most likelihood of being the timeless,
Top
ageless
tier.
classic?
Yeah.
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 Stay tuned for a topic on that in a later podcast episode.
Yeah, we should do that. I think that would be fun to
You should, yeah.
speculate.
Yeah,
And
that
if
would be a fun
we're
topic.
still around, we'll see kind of what our predictions were like.
Right. In
Exactly.
episode 7,000, when we're in our 60s,
Right.
we'll revisit this and see how right we were or how wrong. I'll be wrong. I'm always wrong when it comes to guessing things. So
I know,
Well,
like, the current attitude is a lot of current gaming is not as good, but I don't know. I don't think that's the case for a lot of JRPGs. I think there are some pretty sound JRPGs that will
mhm.
stand the
age
test of
will.
time, but we'll have to see.
I feel like we're in a renaissance for JRPGs now. I feel like a lot of
Yes.
the negative
Yep.
sentiment towards
Um,
video games in general has a lot to do with the fact that video games for most people means like a gotcha box where you are
Yeah.
doing the same thing
Yeah.
over and over and over and over and grinding for chances to pull a character or pull a piece of equipment that's has no effect, like just cosmetics. That's the word.
Cosmetics.
Pulling for a piece
Cosmetics,
of cosmetics.
yeah.
Like, and no, I don't mean any disrespect or shade to like Fortnite or games like Fortnite, but the problem with making a game that you then play for the rest of your life is like you're not really experiencing games anymore, you're experiencing game. And
Mhm.
even though you're addicted to it, like your brain craves that endorphin rush of like winning or getting
Yeah.
the thing that you wanted from the random pull, you can still, like, I have a game that I play on my phone. This is confession time. I'm a little embarrassed. I'm a
Brandon
little
confessions.
I have one game on my phone too. We'll see if it's the same one.
I'm embarrassed to bring this up. It's called Last War, I think.
Last war.
Okay. Not the same.
It's very dumb. It's very dumb. It's not a good game. It's not even fun. But I just keep playing it because the number gets bigger, and that makes my brain happy. But it also makes it sad. So it's like it's this weird like chemical tug of war in my brain over wanting that endorphin hit of, yes, I leveled up my characters and now they're marginally stronger, versus like, what am I doing? I've got so many brilliant works of art on my wall I could be playing right now. But instead I'm on my phone and it's overheating because my phone is just like super hot and it's running this game and it's like my hand is burning and I'm playing this stupid thing.
Is the case on?
No, I don't have a case right now. That's the other thing.
Oh.
You live dangerously.
But yeah, so like that to me is like, that's what Fortnite, that's the problem as I see it. I don't know. I'm just an old man, but that's the problem that I see with video gaming today. People complain about games sucking. It's like, and then people like us are like, what are you talking about? Like there's amazing games, but I think a lot of people are stuck in this loop of playing the same stuff.
But the thing is, I think there's also, because there's so many similar games, they hop onto each of the game but do the same sort of mechanic. Like for me, I don't get addicted to a game for a super long time period, maybe like a month tops, and then I get bored.
That's why I haven't been able to play Final Fantasy 14. Honestly, same thing. I can't stick with it for that long.
I haven't tried that one, but
that's been the hard one.
I probably will be in the same boat. That's why I've been avoiding it. But
yeah.
But I think what we're all wondering is, Emily, what's the game on your phone?
Oh, Honkai Star Rail.
Okay. So you played on okay. All right. That's not too bad.
I was pretty addicted.
It's not that bad, but it's a gacha game.
Yeah.
It's
it was my first
gacha
gacha game. And I just got back into it, like after maybe a year of not playing it.
I need to catch up on
again,
the story.
hot and cold. I get really into it, and then like right now I'm caught up on everything. On all
and
the
that's
stories,
perfect.
all
Like
the side
Honkai's
stuff.
the
I'm like,
perfect.
put it down.
Honkai's the perfect game for that sort of thing, though, because
it is.
There's limited content up to a certain point.
Yeah.
And then you can keep. And the problem that I had, the reason I stopped playing it, was I wasn't advancing the story, even though I find the story very interesting. I was just doing the other stuff,
dailies,
dailies, and like
and the side quests
and all that. Okay. Yeah, I was just doing all that stuff, and I was like, I'm not having fun doing this, but I'm kind of addicted to it. So eventually, I just stopped, and I haven't gone back to it. But I want to go back and actually do the story, catch up to where it is, and then
Penacony story is really good. Like that's what made me like, okay, I'm reinvested in this. I'm looking at skill figures. This is not good, but
that's dangerous.
It is dangerous, especially because they're expensive.
I know they're
the
not
ones
cheap.
I'm looking at.
Yeah,
like more than the Trails ones. But anyway.
Oh, jeez. Okay,
Oof.
They're like $250 before shipping. I'm like, do I want to spring on this?
That's amazing. Yeah.
And then once you buy the first one, it's just gonna spiral.
Because you can't just have one.
No,
you can't have one.
Those gacha games. I don't know how much you guys follow figures or like from gaming, but they have
just what
so
I hear.
many.
Just what I hear from you. I don't follow it
just
outside of you.
So many.
Yeah, same here.
Like in the Hoyoverse stuff, there's not that many, but I feel like we're starting to see them trickle more in. It's gonna be very dangerous. That's why I haven't pulled the trigger yet.
Yeah. They're so good. I know this is an episode about nostalgia, but I got to just say MiHoYo or whatever, MiHoYo, they're so good. Like Genshin Impact also is a very good game. And I know people are down on the gacha stuff, and I get it, but like it's very good. Like it's very good.
Yeah.
And
like,
that's
especially one that's easy to do free to play. Like I haven't spent any money. It's all been free to play.
On both Honkai and Genshin, I spent $5 each, and that was just to buy like the simple little like boost pack. And I was like, I've had so much fun with these games. I'm gonna throw a few bucks at them.
Yeah, what? I see no harm in that, as long as you don't become a whale.
Yeah, there weren't really those sorts of gacha games back in the day. I don't know. I'm sure that developers would have done it if they could have.
Oh, of course.
If they had the ability to extract endless money from a game.
Well, they have the MMOs. At least very much.
I guess that's true. It's the missing link. It's the thing that
the
bridges,
adjacent thing. Yeah.
Yeah, the thing that bridges classic gaming to gacha gaming is sort of the MMO
That
Yeah.
model
deal.
for sure.
Because I
And I remember being so disappointed when Final Fantasy XI was announced as an online game. I was like, I can't play that.
yeah.
I can't subscribe to a game. I don't have any money.
Yeah.
That was a bummer for me.
Yeah.
That was a bummer.
And I remember like during that time, it's kind of like in relation to the gacha games, is like I remember a lot of people that would play like free to play MMOs, but then would also
Mhm.
spend enormous amounts of money on in-game currency and things like that they would use. So like it's kind of got that same
Really?
mentality of like you can play to win,
Yes.
kind of
Oh,
mentality.
yeah.
So
Yeah.
like I think it was like a little less regulated back then because it was like the Wild West of like, MMOs were
For
just
sure.
this was just starting to become a thing.
Well, people were
Online,
buying or selling their accounts too. I know my brother did that with
yeah.
WoW.
My brother did the same thing. He was like hustling accounts here and there. He would just like he would play for so many hours and then just sell them off.
Yeah. Which is
Very
kind of crazy
interesting.
to think about that people would buy that, but I guess that's one way to get into them without the grind.
Yeah, yeah. It was a weird time.
So that's kind of a look at our, our JRPG histories and the games that made us who we are as JRPG players. We're curious to know, the question of the day for you all listening is, what was the JRPG that did that for you? What was the formative JRPG? Pick the most formative JRPG that you can think of in your life and let us know. Again, if you're watching on YouTube, drop it in the comments. We'll find it there. If you're listening on Spotify or Apple Podcasts or wherever else, send us an email at jrpgpursuit@gmail.com and we will read your emails. We look forward to receiving them. And hopefully we'll be able to read some of your answers on an upcoming episode. I think that'll be fun,
Oh
right?
yeah,
Yeah, some more interaction I think will be great.
yeah,
Yeah.
exactly.
So we're all in agreement that it will be great if you do that. So please do
Yep.
that.
Yeah.
Anyway, where can we find you on the internet, Emily?
So I'm on Orbology on YouTube, Twitter, and Instagram. So those are generally the places you could find me.
And Dala, what about you?
I'm on Twitter, so you can find me at Dala998 on the Twitter handle. So look me up.
Awesome. I am on YouTube at Just the Gems. That's my little show. And I'm on Twitter and Instagram and all those other sites as just my name, Branden Johnson. Branden, in case you've been spelling it with an O and breaking my heart.
Every time.
En.
Every
Yeah,
time.
every time. It's like, oh, it's not my name. No, it's fine. I'm used to it. My whole entire 40 years I've seen that like all the time. It's fine. But yeah, that's if you put in the wrong spelling, you're not going to get me though. So it is important that you get the spelling right in this case. Well, thank you all so much once again for taking this trip down memory lane with us. I had a lot of fun. I hope you had a lot of fun as well. We will be back next week with another episode of the JRPG Pursuit for your ears, and we hope you are looking forward to that. And until then, I just want to say goodbye.
Take care.
Bye.